Alright, so today I'm going to move quick because you have that other video that is a very quick and good run through of all the stuff in the first half of this text by Jean-Paul Sartre. This is a PowerPoint that I made last semester when I taught this for an in-class session, so you'll see some elements on it, like partner work and questions that we would have discussed in class. I'm just going to kind of breeze through it. I did post this in the content section of Brightspace, so you can look through the PowerPoint there as well. So I'm just going to try to cover whatever I don't think was in the first video and anything I think that might be left out so that you can do your discussion posts in your homework. Okay, so a lot of the background on Sartre did come in that other video. What I will say is that the important background, historical background to understand existentialism and Sartre is really World War II. And basically the way in which Europe became disillusioned by widespread fascism. So Hitler did take Paris, so that famously did happen, and the Vichy regime was the name of the regime that Hitler put in place after he took Paris. Sartre in particular became disillusioned with the other Parisians because they kind of just lived life as if nothing happened, even though now we're in a fascist occupation and Jewish people were being shipped out of France and all Jewish people were fired from their positions. And that really politicized Sartre to be like, whoa, we need to wake up, what's going on? What do you mean you can just do nothing after the Nazis take over and they're just marching in the streets? I would definitely look into more bio stuff from Sartre if you're interested. I don't want to do too much because I want to keep these videos short. But yeah, there's a lot. He did a lot of activism. He started a publishing house with another famous existentialist writer, Albert Camus. Maybe you guys read The Stranger in high school, but basically they had their publishing house together. He was also partners with Simone de Beauvoir, the very famous feminist who wrote The Second Sex. And she also used that publishing house for feminist issues, to get women writers publicized and to get materials on reproductive rights in particular out there. The text that you guys are reading for today, Existentialism as a Humanism, was a public lecture that he gave in Paris in 1945. So it reads pretty seamlessly because it's a transcript of a public lecture. So it is pretty conversational. Hopefully it's easy for you guys to follow along. Okay, so in this moment, we're also dealing with the progressive forces in France were largely the Communist Party at this time. But right now there's a crisis. Why? Because there's, the ideals that Lenin had for the Russian Revolution. Long story short, when he dies and Trotsky does not gets kicked out by Stalin and Stalin consolidates power and does his own thing, that disillusioned a lot of people and that broke up a lot of communist parties elsewhere. Not everyone was down with what Stalin was doing. Definitely Sartre was one of those people. So he would consider himself a socialist, but he did not join the Communist Party because he had criticisms of Stalin as not really being a Marxist, as not actually being about what socialism and communism is supposed to be about. And so as you can see in his text, existentialism is a humanism, and so he's going to criticize Stalin on existentialist humanist grounds and the lack of human rights in Soviet Russia. He was very active in supporting anti-colonial struggles, particularly in Algeria. This will be really important because our next thinker we're going to be studying is Frantz Fanon, and that's going to be someone that Sartre was friends with and helped to get published. And Fanon was originally from Martinique, but he got involved in the Algerian liberation struggle as Algeria tried to get independence from France because it was a colony of France. But we'll talk a lot more about that for the next couple weeks of class because that's what the rest of the class is going to be about. And Frantz Fanon is like another existentialist, but slightly different. Okay, so I'll just let that go by. You can read the rest on the slide if you're interested. Okay, so this is just the link to that first video that I wanted you to watch, an intro to Sartre and Existentialism. Hopefully you're watching that before you watch this video. Okay, so the important phrase to remember about existentialism is existence precedes essence. And what this means is that who you are and everything about you is not predetermined. There's no human nature, there's no God. Well, there might be God. There are Christian existentialists, but basically it just means that you were born with no path to follow and you make the path as you live. So clearly this is going to challenge, a lot of other kinds of philosophies that do rely on some kind of determinism or concept of human nature. Now, thinking back to Marx, you're probably like, well, what about Marx's concept of human nature? So this is why Sartre was a Marxist. He thought that Marx's understanding of human nature as this open-ended thing that didn't have a particular determination, you can think of that as like a proto-existentialist or frankly even existentialist notion of human nature, as Marx compared that to the nature of animals, which were determined. So you can think of Marx's concept of human nature as an existentialist understanding of human nature, as a process, as something undetermined. Now, this is different than Rousseau and Kant, clearly, who had a very particular understanding of what human nature was. So existentialism is a critique of human nature. Okay, so this text is meant to deal with two main criticisms of existentialism. One is coming from the activists and the communists who are like, existentialism sounds like you shouldn't do anything and just think about your life. It's too focused on the individual when we need to be thinking about collective action. They kind of critique it from the perspective of like individualistic Cartesian epistemology. Then there's criticisms from Christians and Catholics, and that's that existentialism is pessimistic. And what about love and all the good things? And so sometimes people think of existentialism as depressing. But Sartre is going to refute both of these points to say that they misunderstand what existentialism is about. Okay, so what Sartre means by subjectivity is that existence precedes essence. So I have this quote here. What we mean to say is that man first exists, that man is, before all else, something that projects itself into a future and is conscious of doing so. So that's his ground. So it's not any a priori truth of human beings, but that we are thrown into this world, we exist, and then we must make a plan for our lives, basically. So that is his conception of subjectivity. Human beings are special compared to other things like plants or animals in that we are what he calls a project or a projection of ourselves. That means that we are futural kinds of beings and we can imagine who we want to become and we can work towards that. So that is, if you wanted to be like, what's an existential understanding of human nature? It is this. It's this projection into the future that you can create and invent yourself. So while this all sounds super cool and fun and awesome, then the flip side of this is that we are responsible for who we are because we are projections of our own choices. So who you are today is a product of all the choices you've ever made. And so you're responsible for who you are today. So Sartre is all about responsibility because ultimately he's going to say there's no one else who can tell you what to do because at the end of the day, you make your choices. And even in seeking advice, you choose who you ask for advice. So you are responsible. That is kind of the ethical fallout of this. So then existentialism as an ethical doctrine seeks to make us conscious of our responsibility. It's the opposite of relativism or nihilism that would say that nothing matters. In fact, everything matters. This is the overwhelming aspect of existentialism, is that everything is a product of your choice and it really matters. Okay, so this is where Sartre starts to talk about when we choose, there's a sense in which we choose for all others. This, I think, is one of the hardest parts of this text, and what it means is that, so while there's no preset definition of this is what it means to be a good person, this is what human nature is, this is who you should become, through making choices, you are affirming some ideal. So there's a sense in which every time you act, you affirm an ideal. And when you affirm an ideal, Sartre says there's a way that you projecting an ideal is positing for everyone. So this is a place you can kind of think about Kant when he talks about universalizing your will. So he's saying that the structure of what it means to project your desires, wishes, dreams, and then follow them through with actions, you're affirming norms and values, and that those have effects for other people. So everything you do has effects for other people, and this is why you're not only responsible for your actions, but it really matters that you take that responsibility, because how you choose to live your life affects other people. Okay, so this is probably the hardest aspect of this first part of the text, and if you have questions on this, please do come to the Zoom session. Okay, then there's the concepts of anguish, abandonment, freedom, bad faith. So super quick, anguish is the feeling you feel when you realize that you have a lot of responsibility. You are abandoned because there's no one to tell you what to do. So you may think, oh, like, you know, I'm just doing whatever my parents say, what my church has said is right, what my teachers said I should do, what my boyfriend or girlfriend says I should do. But the real truth is, at the end of the day, you have to live with your choices. And you have to take responsibility for making those choices, because ultimately, you are the only one running your life. So you're abandoned, this is why you feel anguish, and this is when we say you have an existential crisis. So existential crisis is like when you freak out because you're like, what am I doing with my life? What choices have I made? You are grappling with the fact that you must take responsibility for your choices and your actions, and who you've become as a person. And so when you feel that responsibility, that's kind of when you have an existential crisis, and you either decide you can come up with explanations for why you do stuff, or you can't, so you have to do something else. Freedom then is integral to what it means to be human, but freedom is also a scary thing. It's not just like the great, awesome thing that we've been talking about with like Rousseau, Kant, and Marx, but now freedom also has a scary aspect because you're radically free. You're just out here. There's no grounds for you to figure out. You must determine what's right, and that's it. Bad faith is, you can think of as like the ethical wrong that you can do as an existentialist. Well, there's no way I can say what you did is wrong based on a particular like principle, because there's no a priori principles like a categorical imperative that can tell me what to do. I can say that you're living in bad faith because you're not taking responsibility for your actions. So that's the only thing that Sartre is going to yell at you about. If you're pretending that you didn't make that choice, you're pretending to not have responsibility, then you're living in bad faith. And that is the issue. Okay. So one of the issues that came up with Kant is, okay, we should always follow duty, but what happens when we have conflicting duties? That is an unresolved issue on Kantian ethics. With Sartre, he basically says that that's the reason why there's no ethical theory that can actually tell you what to do. So he kind of blows up ethics as we know it, and he says, only you can decide what you can do. And only you can decide what the right thing is, and there's no general theory that can tell you what to do in a particular situation. So here's when we get the story of Sartre's student. They go over this pretty well in the other video, so I'm just gonna skip over this. Okay, so here's a summary. Existentialist ethics. We need to make choices in good faith. That means accepting our responsibility. No excuses. We can't look for authenticity to guide our actions because the only authentic thing that we can do is understand that we're condemned to be free. So we must choose what's right and we must stick by it, or we need to make a different choice if we decide that we're wrong. That's all we can do. We have to invent our ethics. This doesn't mean that everything we do is right. It means that we have to take responsibility for our actions and lives affect the rest of humanity. So we can't just rely on what someone else said, but we have to come up with our own interpretation. And in fact, here's an important point. So he talks about how some people will be like, oh, well, I follow signs, or maybe I read my horoscope and that's how I decide what to do. Well, the thing is, you have to interpret that. So you interpret a sign, you interpret a horoscope. So even in that, even if you're like, I make all my decisions based on my horoscope, you must interpret it. So you've made the choice. So there's no escaping your freedom. Okay, lastly, he says we must act without hope because there's no guarantees. If you choose to join, the revolution, you have to join knowing you may not win, that the revolution might end in terror, not liberation. Choice does not guarantee getting humanist results. Some people might choose fascism. So that was his fear. And when I made this last year, or whenever I actually made this a couple years ago, it was right when Bolsonaro just became president in Brazil. So some, people can choose terrible leaders. So just because you choose doesn't mean it'll be great for everybody. Okay, so what you have to do is be responsible for your actions and understand what they affirm as what ought to be, that there's no such thing as innocence, that you have to stand by your actions. And if they're wrong, then you gotta say that they're wrong. So you need to make choices then that you're gonna be okay with, regardless of what happens, that you can stand by. Okay. Then this conclusion here, this is basically variation on your homework assignment. Okay, so I've tried to be really quick today. If you have more questions, please do come to the Zoom session or shoot me an email. All right, hope you enjoyed Sartre.